I want to talk a little bit about the world that I created. Hopefully, the fact that I say I've created a world is not blasphemous or irreligious. I don't want to equate myself with God. Historically, things have not gone well for those who have done that, and certainly I've not created my own world as God did, ex nihilo. No, the world I created has been created from things that I experienced in the world that God made. Importantly, it's been created using ideas that other people came up with to create their worlds. I think that most little kids encounter stories or media that fascinate them, and then they play in those fantastic universes. They combine them in ways that are fun for them and make stuff up to fill in the gaps. I was the same. Probably the most important media for creating my world in the early days were Star Wars and Thundar the Barbarian.
2,000 years later, Earth is reborn. A strange new world rises from the old. A world of savagery, super science, and sorcery. But one man bursts his bonds to fight for justice. With his companions, Ukla the Mock and Princess Ariel, he pits his strength, his courage, and his fabulous sun's sword
Against the forces of evil. Yeah, I loved that. I loved that magic and the idea that you could destroy evil, and I like the rise against evil that was more powerful than you. I think especially when you're a kid and everything is more powerful than uh, you really latch on to that. And so I did, and I quickly added to that, of course, Masters of the Universe when I was young. As soon as I was reading very much at all, my parents introduced me to the Chronicles of Narnia. Wasn't long after that I got into Tolkien and the Hobbit and then the Lord of the Rings. And then I got into Anne McCaffrey. I got into Dragonlance and all those TSR back before it was Wizards of the Coast, all those TSR worlds of uh, Forgotten Realms and Ravenloft and all of that. And I just was fascinated, and I kept playing on it. I kept playing and imagining myself in these worlds and combining the worlds in ways that were fun and unique to me. And I think a lot of people do that. Like I said, I think every kid does that. But for me, I kept doing it even as I grew up and got older. And even when I got into college and I would start to read things like Plato or Aristotle, or I was a political science major and communication major in undergrad, and I would read, about how governments work and how people interact with each other, and I would just continually bring this in to the world that I was creating. So, there's just so many influences that I've brought in. So many that I've brought in that I'd like to talk about art and music and other things that have come together in my thinking, the different philosophies I've looked into, all of that. But I also really, really want to get right now into the world itself so I can talk about that. This map that you're looking at now I sometimes joke that it is the best map ever of the world that I created. And it is in some ways the very best map I've ever made. But it's not a map of the physicality of the world. It's a map of the metaphysics. And sometimes the very best maps, it's better to get a map with a little less information. So we'll sort of switch to that now and talk about it. So here it is. This is maybe a little bit better map of the metaphysics of my world. And you can look at it and you can see some things that are kind of going on here. The big thing you'll see on the outside, you see that A, which is I'm using an alpha, and up at the top an omega. Aristotle in his metaphysics talked about how everything that has an end has to have a beginning, and he figured out that everything so it has to have a beginning, something that starts it, something that begins something. Everything has a cause. Everything that has an end has a cause. And so as he looked into that, he realized that there ultimately had to get back at some point to something that is endless and causeless, that could be the ultimate cause to everything. And so he figured that out, and the Taoists in China kind of figured out a very similar concept of ultimately what they call heaven, and that there has to be something that starts the flow of everything and that has the end of the flow of everything. There has to be this beginning, and this beginning can't be something that ends. So I kind of, that's why we have the dotted lines up here at the top, is because the alpha and the omega flow together. And I also have this circle here, and I'm using that circle up at the top to represent the heavenly realms, is what I would call them. The realms where there are interactions with this eternal, this alpha and omega. And again, I have the dotted lines there to show that it's not really something separate or outside. It's something with. And so that's kind of what we have here at the beginning. Let's go ahead and just zoom in a little bit into um, the first acts of the first act of creation, which we have here, what I'm calling the astral, or sometimes the celestial, although on any of these outer realms beyond uh, air would be celestial. But anyway, the astral realm is it's not saying that the stars don't exist in physical space, but there's this really cool thing in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis, and in that story, uh, one of the protagonists, actually probably the main protagonist, if we want to be honest about that story, is a kid named Eustace, and he's kind of a smart aleck kid, and so he's in this fantastic world, but he's from our world, uh, a version of our world from the 1940s, and so he meets somebody who is a star, like a literal star in the sky, and he says to somebody else there, he says to Aslan, if you're familiar with the story, he says, "Well, in our world, stars are just giant balls of gases," and Aslan says, "No, even in your world, that's what stars are made out of, not what stars are." And so I think that in this astral situation, we have the first act of creation. We have the act of light. We have the act of light coming in, and maybe there's no physical um, body associated with it, but we have that kind of uh, we have that kind of constant light and being, and that kind of flows into the rest of creation. Um, we come then to the lunar, the lunar realm. The lunar realm is again, we're not necessarily talking about the physicality of the moon, but we're talking about things that, or the moons on our world, which we'll get to hopefully later in this video. Uh, we're not talking about the physicality of the moon. We're talking about The ebbs and flows and seasons of life is really what we're talking about, or even not life, the ebbs and flows and seasons and change of all of that. And that's sort of the next kind of act of creation is this idea of something that something that is for signs and seasons and works and all of that. And then we have below that the the traditional astronomical symbol for the sun. And then the sun, we have the solar realm. We have we have life-giving light to everything, and the the power that moves in us and that kind of keeps everything going. Uh, I sometimes also call uh, this last realm the ethereal realm, because it's in the ether. The ether is the stuff of physical creation, and that kind of bridge between the physical and ultimately the conceptual. If we're going to go with kind of a Platonic system where we're kind of moving out of Plato's cave. Well, we're moving into Plato's cave as we move down, move out as we move up. So that's the Platonic. So at this point, then we're looking at things that constitute physical realms, the physical, the things that we can see, hear, taste, touch, smell, all of those things. And we start to look at that, and you see the one with the triangle there. That's the traditional alchemical sign for fire. And so the highest realm of the physical touches on the lowest realm of the celestial or platonic. And that is fire. Fire is this bridge between the ancients noted that fire just keeps going up, and because it goes up, it must be lighter than air. And so lighter is better in uh, Aristotelian philosophy, especially. And so when we look at that, lighter is better, and fire goes up. Then we come to that the triangle with the cross across is the traditional alchemical symbol for air, and air represents air. It's a realm of air, a realm where there is breathable things and clouds and stuff like that. Uh, the one divided in half below is we see the alchemical symbols for uh, water up on top and then earth below. And so these are kind of going in levels of heaviness, which is kind of an important concept. Now, besides those elemental worlds, you see kind of there within the element of air and kind of crossing over into fire on the calf side are some other worlds. One of the worlds on the one you see on the left is the calf. The calf is a world primarily of air and fire, uh, but that does take part in water and earth, and that is from my world, the world of the jinns. That's where genies come from, where Efreeti come from, where those type of marids come from, and that's kind of where they come from. Is this world of the calf? And sometimes they're summoned into my world in various and sundry ways, but they actually have kind of their own world. So when I say I created worlds, I actually created several. On the other side, you see the alchemical symbol for the crucible, that triangle with the cross above it. And I use that to represent a world I call the dream. The dream is a place of change and of magic, of growth and decay, of massive change, and it's where we consider like the fey creatures would come from, for things like fairies or boogeymen or anything like that. That's sort of what we would see over there in the calf. You see kind of in the center of the earth half of the earth fire, in the earth hemisphere, you can see kind of in the center of that the alchemical symbol for sulfur. It's also called the sign of the Leviathan, that symbol that you see there. And that is hell. That's hell. If we're going with an Aristotelian metaphysics, which I mostly adopted for my universe, uh, evil is bad and good is light. And evil just keeps going down, keeps going down, keeps going down. So we have that as the ultimate down. But underneath it in the picture is another world that partakes of all the realms, all of them. It touches on all of them, which is why the circle was drawn the way it was from heaven to hell. It touches on all the realms, and that is the universe in which my world takes place, right? So that's kind of the metaphysics, and now we can start to move on to more of the physics. So this metaphysical universe supports a physical universe, and my world exists in a physical universe. It exists in a galaxy which we would recognize as a galaxy by the standards of Earth astronomy, and it exists in a solar system, which we would recognize as a solar system by the standards uh, of Earth solar systems, of what we know of solar systems. I call the star that it circles the sun. Just go ahead and copy that from my own English wording. I call it the sun, and there are really 8 planets that circle the sun, but there are 6 planets with names, because the ones further out from that can't really be seen without some kind of instrumentation, which those kinds of instruments and those kinds of science do exist on Tel, but it's not something that outside of maybe academic circles anybody really knows. The 6, though, that can be seen are the one furthest from the sun is called Geo. The one closer in is called Moose. Then we have Tel, and we have Locus, which is a little further in towards the sun. It actually supports life as well. And there are occasionally magical interchanges between the two. Then comes Graham, does not support life, and Rhett, I don't even think it has an atmosphere. So those are the planets, and they circle the sun. We consider the amount of time it takes Tel to circle the sun. I call it a year. I just steal that again right out of English. And Tel also has months, which I steal right out of English, and those months are tied to the moons. They're specifically tied to the larger white moon. There are 2 moons. The larger white moon is, in most cases, most people call it the white moon. It has a name of Sophia. So sometimes people will call it Sophia, but mostly they call it the white moon, and mostly people call the smaller moon the pink moon. Uh, both moons can be seen from anywhere on Tel at some point during the year. The white moon can be seen just about every day from every point on Tel at some point during the day or night. The red moon can only be seen during the summer months, when you're talking about areas outside the tropics. So it's a world that exists like our world, with gravity functioning much the same way that it functions on Earth, and with days and nights and things that we would really recognize as if we were to go there, like somebody from our world were to go there, they'd be comfortable with the day, night, lunar cycles. But it's more than that. it's a place, and places are different from just things that exist. Places become places because they're named as places by creatures with language, and there are creatures with language who inhabit this world, and they're able to interact with each other. The vast majority of these creatures with language are hominids, very similar to humans here on Earth. And in fact, there's one group that I call humans because they are so like humans on Earth. They tend to be between, if you find one who's 7 foot tall, that's really tall. 6 foot to 5 foot. If you find one that's shorter than 5 foot, you found a really short human. But they exist. Their colors tend to be skin tones, earth tones. Um, their hair also kind of earth tones, although a little more extreme than what you'd find in the skin. Their eyes range in a number of different colors, probably what we'd call gem tones. They're interesting. As far as magic goes, magic is a huge part of this world, but humans don't tend to have terribly much access to the ether, um, the ethereal realm, the stuff of creation that we talked about before. The only two ways that a human can, well, there's only one way that a human can get access to uh, ethereal magic, and that is through intense study. In addition to intense study, the human needs to bond themselves in some way to an object that comes from one of the exterior realms or to a creature that comes from one of the exterior realms. And that's basically the only way that a pure blooded human, and I say pure blooded because we'll talk about uh, other options that could go through here, but that's the only way that a pure blooded human is really going to get access to magic. It's just not a super common thing. As far as cultures go, what other cultures find really fascinating about humans is that they build structures in which they live and work. This building of houses and barns and stuff like that really fascinates other cultures. It's not typically done outside of humankind. Uh, they don't really, other cultures don't really get so much into that. They're very fascinated by the fact that humans tend to travel the same paths over and over and over and create beaten paths or roads. That's something that a lot of the other races just find really strange or interesting. Uh, and also the fact that humans are really fascinated by fire. More than any other race, you'll always see them, like, if they make camp, they will build a fire even in the hottest night of the summer. And the other races can all use fire, but they don't see it as like this first thing that you have to do when you come into a living space is to have fire. And none of them, they aren't structure builders. None of the other races are, but none of them would actually like bring fire inside their homes. That would be seen as insane for most of them. But humans do it, and other cultures are really interested in the fact that humans tend to do that. Humans are the most popular. Not popular. No, they're the most populous race, probably. Maybe it's close. They can be found on every single continent throughout the world. The second most populous, or maybe the most populous, are merfolk. Merfolk are aquatic hominids. They live in the water most of the time. They've developed their legs have been fused into a fin, and they've grown a dorsal fin to keep them even, and they live most of the time in the water. They're larger than humans. Their colors tend to be dark. They tend to be like blues, greens, really dark colors, black, much blacker than humans ever actually get, extremely black skinned. And they have bioluminescent spots that they use to see by when they go deep and to see each other and interact with each other when they go deep. Magic for mermaids is about as rare as it is for humans. A pure-blooded mermaid is, again, not terribly likely to have access to magic. However, they have some abilities. I mentioned the bioluminescence that a lot of outsiders see as magical, but the main thing is their lungs. They have really intense lungs, so that they can dive deep, so that they can be underwater for 45 minutes and maybe even an hour in some cases at a time, so that they can dive deep and go deep. And they also have echolocation, which seems magical to a lot of other races. No other major race has echolocation, but they do. They have echolocation, and they're pretty cool with all that. But their lungs, like I said, with those lungs and with the echolocation, they have very sensitive hearing, very sensitive, very strong lungs. So this has made them into just incredible musicians. And sometimes the music is so incredible that it actually does attract the interest of extraplanar beings, and they respond in ways that seem magical. It's not so much and humans can sometimes do that too if they're really skilled artists. Any of the races can if they're really skilled artists, or extraplanar beings start to respond as if there was magic happening here. But it's less controlled than you would think of with really magic. They're not necessarily sure of what will happen with it. But they are beautiful singers, amazing musicians, because of their sensitive hearing and their amazing lung capacity. After that, probably the next, I'm really divided on whether the Allure or the Dwellers are the next most common race. I'm going to go with the Allure. The Allure live in forests, jungles, heavily wooded areas on every continent, and most of the islands on Tel. They have hair on top of their heads and tend to have less hair than humans, except for a subspecies that lives in the Cambrian wilds, and they tend to be very furry, actually. But otherwise, they tend to have less hair than humans. They're arboreal. They're smaller than humans. If you found one who was 5.5 feet tall, you'd have found a really, really tall one. And they seem even smaller because they hardly ever walk completely upright. They're usually crouched down, getting down. They can get upright, and they do that to manipulate objects and stuff, but they prefer to crouch down and at least keep 3 of their appendages on the floor if they're on the ground. Otherwise, they prefer to climb, really. And their lower limbs are as dexterous as their upper limbs, and they have opposable appendages on those lower limbs, and so they tend to really climb. They'd really prefer to climb than they ever would to walk. And they'll generally avoid walking if they can. As far as like their manufacturers go, they try not. They don't use forges or anything like that. And so they chip a lot of flint or obsidian or other kind of natural glasses for arrowheads and knives. They use a lot of bones for those things, arrowheads and knives, and a lot of wood in their work. They use a lot of leather to do the work they do. As far as magic goes, 1 in 4 of them are what they call Ligtflu, which means in their language magic blood, or light blood too. But anyway, it means magic blood, and it's blood that's hereditary, and there's kind of similar metaphors on my world with blood and DNA. But the idea of magic, about 1 in 4 of them are able to do this. And what happens is they have just a natural connection to the ether and are able to do magical things, and in fact have to. They have really bad effects on their bodies and things if they don't. So they need to do this kind of magic, but not all of them. About 1 in 4 can, and otherwise I guess they could get magic in the same way that humans do if they really need to. There are other things about them that might appear magical to a lot of other races. Um, they, but they're not actually magical things about them, and it tends to be more universal than the Lichtflu thing. Um, their ability to climb might seem magical to other races because it'd be really difficult for most races to get around that way. They're very, very good at hiding. Mostly this is because they can crouch down into such a tiny little ball and kind of put themselves up in the leaves and hold very, very still. And it's not magical. It's just they're good at hiding the same way. You've got a massive mule deer in my backyard here in Silver City. I don't even know until suddenly it moves across. I'm like, oh, it was right by my house. Kind of the same thing, just to be able to be really still and blend in. Uh, that seems magical. But probably the other thing that would seem very magical to other races is they have a way of seeing called light vision and life vision. And when they're in fairly dim light, they switch from seeing things kind of the way humans would see them to seeing things a different way, and that is they see the radiation of life. So they see plants as having kind of a silver glow, and they see animals and people as having a sort of a red pulsing glow that pulses with their heartbeat. Um, and so they can see that even in pretty much pitch black. They can see those things. And so actually that's sort of the way they prefer to hunt, is actually in the dark, so that they can see something glowing red there. As far as things though that aren't living, they just appear as blackness to them. So if you put like a block in front of a tree, they would see the tree, and then they would see this black space in front of it. It's not like they can see other things by the life of the things that they see. So that's another thing that seems magical about them. It's not necessarily, but it seems that way. They're a fairly spiritual people, and so they tend to call on extraplanar beings quite a bit, just as prayers and that kind of thing. And a lot of times those extraplanar beings, those gods, or fairies, or whatever it is that they're interacting with, will give them magical powers too. So I went with the Allure next, and I said, I was trying to decide whether it would be Allure or uh, dwellers. Dwellers are pretty common. Dwellers are pretty common. They're on every continent, and they live in forests, they live in cities, they live in fields, they live in mountains, they live in caves, they live all over the place. Basically, what dweller dwellers, what they look like are they tend to look a lot like humans, but quite a bit smaller. They tend to have bushy hair and kind of uh, extreme showings of emotions, extremely expressive, beyond what most humans or Allure or Merfolk or Sven or Natarians or Saurons, any of them that I'm going to talk about, they tend to be the most expressive. They're very dexterous, very capable of doing any kind of craftsmanship that requires a lot of fine motor skills. They're really, really good at that, um, and they do that, and they are culturally, they tend to just kind of act like whatever culture they're closest to. So if you're in a human town, you'll probably look and find dwellers there, and they're acting like humans, although sometimes they act like a caricature of the culture they're going into. So humans build houses, and so these dwellers build these crazy houses. Or if they live among the Allure don't really do that. They don't. And so dwellers who live along the Allure will try and live in trees. They're not as suited to climbing as Allure are. They'll try and live in trees, and They'll be a little bit more extreme about, I'm not going to touch the ground. I'm not going to use metal tool stuff like that. Then even, an Allure will use a metal knife if you give them one. They're just not going to make one. And so they have that going on. As far as magic goes, uh, it's fairly common for a not as common as it is among Allure, but fairly common for a dweller to be born with the ability to do magic. And also, of course, there's magic that comes from extraplanar beings. Um, so that's dwellers. The next most common are Sven. And Sven are, you can see when I talk about Sven, I've definitely been influenced by a lot of typical fantasy dwarves. I'm not going to pretend I haven't. But they're different than typical fantasy dwarves. First of all, in their looks, they have very little melanin, and so little to none. And so they tend to avoid going out in sunlight if they can at all, and tend to have pinkish, yellowish skin. White hair, light colored eyes. That tends to be really typical. It's not that you won't see one with dark eyes occasionally, but you're just not going to see that. Uh, they are they are an incredibly matriarchal culture, um, and kind of a woman heads her family and looks to another woman up in the hierarchy. So they're matriarchal, but extremely hierarchical. Um, and actually don't tend to function very well when those hierarchies break down or when they don't have a strong woman kind of guiding their clans. So that's really important to them and to their culture. Uh, as far as magic goes, um, in some ways they are extremely spiritual and are extremely magical around that. Even just reaching out towards extraplanar beings, like to pray or something like that, gives them basic magical abilities with regard to temperature and with regard to stone. Being able to move through it without kind of phase through it, or being able to meld it the way that they want it to. They're different than fantasy dwarves in another way. They don't do all that much manufacturing as the Nordic dwarves or the fantasy dwarves that have copied off of those do. Instead, what they do is they meld stone into particular shapes for the things that they need and that they do. And that's really the way that they do it. It's not, you don't see the Sven hitting the hammer at the forge. It's just not going to be something that happens. So they're really interesting in that way. They're found only in cave systems. Any place where if you have a lot of like limestone deposits, so that caving is pretty well done, then they'll be there. But other situations like around volcanoes where you have those lava tubes and stuff like that, they tend to stay in cave systems. And in fact, the holier members of the group, which the women are always priestesses, really try never to leave the dark. They try not to. They can see in the dark. They are able to generate an energy inside their body that goes out, and they can see that energy with their eyes just like we could light. And so it goes out about 60 feet from them. They can really only see their own. Sometimes you'll have one who can see by another person's energy, but that's actually probably a problem. They can't read by it, so they do use fire and light for little things, like if they need to read or if they need to set off a space as sacred or something like that. They do use fire for that, but they're not as attracted to fire as humans are. The next most common, and at this point we drop like humans, merfolk, allure, dwellers, Sven. there are probably millions of all of those. When we drop to the next level, Natarians, there's probably not. Well, there are probably millions. Uh, Not tens of millions, though. Certainly not hundreds of millions. Um, there might be tens of millions. I don't know. There's quite a few, but they're not anywhere close to the rest of these. Natarians are huge, which means they can really only live in places where they can get enough to eat. They're 7 foot tall Natarian would be short. An 8 foot tall one would be really tall. So there's not as much range as there are some races. They're tall, they're strong, they're covered in fur, um, head to toe. They have some blank spaces on their hands, blank spaces around their face, but otherwise they're covered in fur. They are very strong. They're seen, especially by other races, as being militaristic and violent. Even they're very hierarchical, very patriarchal, and very hierarchical, and very much what we would say they're high power distance in what we use in communication studies, which means they kind of need to know who's in charge, and if they don't know who's in charge, then they will try and be in charge, and so that's really important to them, and uh, they're pretty smart, but they don't tend uh, to build large cultures or large civilizations. They prefer to be much more tribal, and because of that, knowledge is passed down primarily orally and tends to change a little bit. As far as magic goes, they are a lot of them are capable of natural magic, just magic that comes up inside of them. Not probably, well, probably about as many as the Allure. Um, the Natarians are able to do magic every now and then. The magical people in their tribe are generally very well respected, or sometimes feared. But they're able to do that. The next group, the Saurons. Saurons, of course, if you hear Saurons, and if you're looking at a picture of a Sauron, you definitely are going to think that it's something like a reptile of some kind. That word Sauron, of course, implies it. Um, they're not. They are actually mammalian, but they're different than all the others. But earlier I said, a pure-blooded human. All of the others can interbreed and have viable offspring between their kids. They can do it. Mostly don't, but the other species can interbreed, and the kids are viable, and a lot of times even the occasion they're even fertile. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they're fertile, and can go on for generations interbreeding. The Saurons, you cannot have a baby with a Sauron if you're a human, a Merfolk, an Allure, a Dweller, a Sven, and Natari, and it's not going to work. They are probably not hominids. They may very well be some kind of simian. That would probably make a lot of sense for what they are, but they're probably not hominids. They live in jungles. They're really only on 3 continents. They're on Sara, which is their home continent, and there they are the most populous race, the most populous species. There's more Saurons on Sara than there are anything else, and they live in the jungles there. They also live in Aspasia. The ones in Aspasia are a little different than the ones in Sara. The ones in Sara tend to be more green. They have scales, and this is the thing. They have scales, but the scales are more keratinous. They're not. They're like horns on cattle. They're smaller though, and they grow all over their body. And they use them to protect themselves, but they tend to be uh, more keratinous, and their scales tend in the jungles of Sara to mostly be green. And those green ones also do kind of live in the jungles of Aspasia, but more Saurons have moved in Aspasia. They've moved more to the central desert. We'll kind of talk about that when we get to geography. But they've kind of moved more to the central desert, and the scales just kind of take on the color of the stuff around them as they're doing it. And so in the central desert, they tend to be much more yellow. And then there's a group of Saurons who live in Nordica, a continent to the north, and they tend to be a lot smaller than the Saurons of the warmer climates of Aspasia and of Sara. Um, they tend to be a lot smaller and quiet. All of these, they prefer to hunt in dim light. They tend to prefer to live in dim light. They prefer to have fairly tribal cultures. That's what they tend to prefer, rather than having kings or anything like that. Uh, as far as gender, their gender norms aren't terribly tight. Um, they you probably find some that are patriarchal, some that are matriarchal, but probably overall most tribes are fairly meritocratic. Of course, like all mammals, the males are a little bit bigger and stronger than the females, but that doesn't that doesn't matter much. As far as magic goes, um, there's a kind of magic that really tends to draw them. First of all, they have a connection to the Fae. So do the Allure, but they have a connection to the Fae and can a lot of times draw off of that from extraplanar abilities. And so there's quite a bit of magic among them, and they do use magic fairly often. As things go, probably about as often as Allure. Probably about 1 in 4 of them are capable of some kind of magic. Um, the last of the great races are the Gentry. The Gentry are extremely magical. The Gentry are actually not from Tel. Now, there's a certain extent to which none of the races are actually from Tel, but they are from the Fae. But they found a way to live on Tel permanently, and they have a lot of magic. They're able to do all kinds of magical things that others can't do. Most most gentry keep themselves small, about 3 foot, sometimes as small as 1 foot. Um, Part of the magic that just flows through them all the time is that they are forced to change their size every single day. But the more that they change their size, there's an inverse relationship between size and intelligence. And being aware of that, when they start to get up to 8 feet tall or something like that, they tend to have just maybe an animalistic kind of intelligence. And even at 5 foot tall, they're just they'd strike you as a not terribly bright person, and they'll let themselves get tall when they need to do something physically. So you might meet a member of the gentry who's 5 foot tall because he needs to do some work, but then as soon as he can, he'll probably make himself get smaller again. They can change their size about once a day, and they can only change it a little bit each day. They can only change it by 6 or 7 inches, but they'll generally, once they start to get big, they'll want to get smaller because that's when they're more powerful. They also all of them carry with them a pocket dimension, and that they can step into when they're small. When they're bigger, they don't fit in it, but they use that to hide from outsiders and stuff like that. Gentry are rare. There's no large community of hundreds of gentry anywhere on Tel. What you'll do is you'll find maybe a gentry family, or more likely 1 or 2 gentry in pairs traveling usually, or tied to a particular place. But they don't tend to travel in groups, and there's honestly not too many of them. But there's enough of them that I decided I would go ahead and keep them in my list of races. Beyond the Gentry, there are other intelligent beings with language, beings with sapience, besides just the ones that I've mentioned. But all of them are occasional and rare, and not something that you're going to, if you travel the world, going to probably meet, unless you are very lucky or extremely unlucky, and probably more of the latter. Um, there are, I mean, as far as sapience goes, there are uh, probably about 3 dozen dragons in the world, a little more than that. But like I said, there's just not that many. You'll find that of a lot of beings that exist in this world, that they have sapience, they have intelligence, but they're not enough of them that I would really say you have to know that going in. So that's the races. Oh, before I turn to geography, before I do that, I almost forgot, and I want to get this in here. There's actually 2 versions of my world. So the races you've just saw are the one that primarily exists in my own mind. I've written 1 novel. I'm working on a second, but mostly it just exists in my head, and it's kind of a world that I travel in my imagination at this point. The other one is world designed for the Pathfinder First Edition role playing game, and in that one, the races are all different. I just basically, like I might plug in Allure as elves, even though there's differences between Allure and elves, and like Sven, I might put in dwarves, or I might put in drow, depending on what's good, because they're matriarchal. So it kind of depends on what's going on in the world when I want to play DM a role playing game with Pathfinder First Edition. But in the First Edition games, we just have races that fit with that. All right, so if we were to look at most world maps that exist on Tel, we would see that usually right about in the center is Wahhabit. Wahhabit is not a very big continent, and it is very sparsely populated. In fact, you could even say that in some ways it's just part of this mega continent. But it's probably the most important continent on the map. It's probably the most important culturally, even though it's very sparsely populated and not uh, particularly big. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start there, because it is in many ways the most important continent. And the reason it's the most important continent is because this is where the religion that more people follow on Tel than any other religion. This is where it originated. Um, so about, depending on where I'm playing and where I'm writing, I generally look at about 1800 to about 1900 years ago. There was a person who lived on this continent, and he was called Messiah. And he was half Allure. His parents were his mother was the chiefess of her tribe of Allure, and his father was a human probably captured in in one of their battles, and sort of used as a slave in a lot of ways, but including the type of slave that would produce with his mother. But she loved him very much. She loved her son very much. I don't know so much about her husband. Um, and so um, Messiah was able to move back and forth between both Allure and humans because of his background. And so he would go into human cities and he learned to read, to write, to think of stuff like that. And he would pass for human. And then he would go back among his Allure tribe and troop and pass as Allure. He could really do both. And in doing that, he came to some conclusions. Now, at this time, before the Messiah came, there were literally thousands of gods worshipped across Tel and hundreds of gods worshipped across Wahhabit. Lots and lots. It was like every troop of Allure would have their god, or every tribe of humans would have their god, and then they would have probably a few other extra gods that they would use for different things, and that was kind of what went on. Now, Messiah was a smart guy, and he came to kind of this conclusion about gods. And he came to this conclusion about gods that the gods that the humans were worshiping in the cities, probably Tel Ben Kodash as being the most important. Even then, maybe Beneville was then. But the gods that this group of humans were the same gods as he was worshiping. They just went by different names. And so he started to spread his belief. And he spread it among first the Allure and humans with whom he had contact. But he also eventually started, down here is Geirsnecht, which is an entrance into a Sven cavern system. And he started to spread it among the Sven. And that their goddesses, the Sven don't worship gods. Even today, they'll say, "Oh, there are gods," but they're just servants to the goddesses. But anyway, he started to spread this idea that they were the same. And so by the end of this, he kind of came up with a system. And what he did is he would go around to tribes and he would take their stories and their myths and try and combine them in a way that would make sense for them to be a part of it. And then he would present that to the tribes that he would work with, mostly human and Allure, and also a little bit of Sven. There are some tribes of well, at the time there were Saurons, but there aren't any now. They've all been wiped out by the Council of Clergy, which we'll get to in a minute. At the time there were Saurons here too, and I don't know whether he attempted to convert them before he killed them off. But that was sort of his idea. He would present that to the tribe, that your religion is our religion. We just have slightly different names for these religions. And then they would either agree with him and kind of convert to his religion, or they would die. So by the end, the Council of Clergy, by the time it was established, he would kill them, and they would grow, and then he would kill them. And so, if they didn't agree with him that this was true, they would die. And so he was very militaristic, very much repent or perish. Although repentance probably doesn't quite mean the same thing for a member of the Council of Clergy as we'd look at it in like Western Christian tradition and on Earth. But anyway, because you don't necessarily repent away from evil, you repent away from not believing in the council. So anyway, the council was eventually formed under the Messiah's leadership, and the Council of Clergy was the religious leaders, and there was one member of the Council of Clergy to represent each of the gods that they finally settled on. They finally, at the end, settled on 27 gods. There are 27, 9 gods of heaven, 9 gods of hell, 9 gods of the high mountain. And the high mountain is actually a physical place right over here, and it's an actual place. Heaven and hell. The main way you go to those places is by dying, but the high mountain is just right over here. And so there are gods of heaven, gods of hell, and gods of the high mountain. And the high mountain actually isn't probably even the highest mountain in this range where uh, Wahhabit and Sara and Cambria come together. It's probably not even the highest mountain in that range, but it's high. And the thing is, the equator is pretty close down to here near the Crocodile River, but this mountain is high enough that there's like snow on it most of the time. Maybe all the time there's snow, so it's really a high mountain, but it's not even the highest. And if and plenty of people have gone up there, and most of them don't see any gods. But that's where the gods live. Anyway, so that's the gods of the high mountain live there near Garsny. So yeah, he started the Council of Clergy, and the Council of Clergy imposed a theocracy on the continent. This is the only continent that we'll look at where there's kind of just one government. Now, on one hand, there's a theocracy that rules the continent. On the other hand, those same tribes that were there 1800, 1900 years ago are still wandering around. So the Council of Clergy meets in Tel Ben Kadash, and it is where they make decisions, where they talk about theology, where they come to conclusions about their gods and the relationship of their gods to the world, and how people should live since there are gods like this and stuff like that. They discuss that there, and they send out their clergy from there. That doesn't mean that all clergy have come from there. In fact, across the world, most of the clergy members of the Council of Clergy have actually never been here. The clergy are formed by seminaries, and wherever they get about 18 clergy members within walking distance of each other, they set up a seminary to train more clergy members. So the religion is spread throughout the world that way. But this is where the Messiah, about 1800, 1900 years ago, set up the Council of Clergy, and the Council of Clergy still meets there today. There are on the entire continent, there are no navigable rivers. It is mostly a desert continent. Right down here along the Crocodile River, that kind of goes between Wahhabit and Sara. Down there are woods. Each of the major oases have forested areas, and quite a few Allure in that area. And so there's those, and there's forested areas right over here, south of Noble's Retreat, and there's plenty of woods here through the steads between Fireport and Noble's Retreat. You'll notice those two sound real. The Fireport and even the steads and Noble's Retreat don't really sound like the same type of things, and that's because I took them from English, and for the most part I took these names of cities from various Semitic languages, mostly Hebrew and Arabic. But anyway, I could find those online. So those are the cities. One of the big export of Wahaba is religion, and the big import is pilgrims. So there's a tradition that if you want to be blessed, that you must travel from Tel Ben Kadash to the high mountain. So you would travel along there along what they called the Pilgrim's Road. Now the Pilgrim's Road actually starts out in Hadaro Raphael. Starts out in Hadaro Raphael and then moves to Tel Ben Kodash and then moves all the way to the high mountain. And you go to the high mountain and you can, have a spiritual experience. And the gods will be really happy with you for having done that. The thing is, not everybody necessarily does that. Pilgrim's Road begins way over here on the west coast and goes way over here to the high mountain in the east. And that's seen, if you do this, as being a great thing. Now, there's some people, though, who kind of fake that they do it. You come in here, you go along here, and that's supposed to prove that you are cool. Now, there's two areas here along the Pilgrim's Road that you would want to look out for. To the north, we have the Goblins' Waste. Now, when I talked about races, I didn't talk about goblins. And there's a reason for that. It's because they're not a race. Goblins don't reproduce. They don't have children. They don't make babies. Instead, they are created by people who have magical abilities and are able to touch on the extraplanar dimension of hell. And they are summoned from hell into this vat of bones and mud. And that vat of bones and mud is sort of brought to life with this demonic spirit inside it. And why would you do that? Well, to make slaves. That's one of the primary reasons that you would do it. So that's an issue. And to the south here is the Thieves Waste. Now, here's the thing. Making it clear across this desert shows your dedication to the gods. Make it clear across the Pilgrim's Road from Hadaro Raphael all the way to the high mountain. Shows your dedication to the gods, and that you're willing to follow them. So yeah, the reason this is called Thieves Waste is because there are a lot of thieves there. Because one of the ways is to get clear across the Pilgrim's Road is to be really, really dedicated and to work hard to stretch yourself, push yourself beyond your abilities. But another way to make it is to be rich and to be able to bring a caravan with all the comforts you need to not really make it that much. And so the thieves the thieves who live there actually see robbing pilgrims as being a service to the gods, because, or at least they use that as an excuse. Whether they really believe that or not, they use that as an excuse because they can rob people as they go through, and then they get rich. So that's how they do it. And then also there's Pirates Pass right down here that goes into the Pirates Coast. Right in here it's really a rocky coastline and high cliffs, and not really actually very easy to get through. But there are little places where pirate ships dock, and pirates will actually head out to sea and stop pilgrims even before they get to Hadaro Raphael and rob their ships. that's what they do, and they see themselves as, like I said, or at least they claim to see themselves as doing work for the gods by robbing the pilgrims who are going to serve the gods, and therefore making the journey of the pilgrims more interesting. But there's kind of an arms race, right? So really wealthy people will then hire better guards, and there's an entire industry of paladins who guard pilgrims along the pilgrims road, and get paid for that, and then the thieves then have to be more powerful than the paladins, and it's just this huge thing. And so yeah, there's thieves to the south and goblins to the north. So you would move from Hadaro Raphael to Christa's Well. Christa's Well actually is a well, and it's connects. There's not really any surface. Well, there are surface rivers. They're just not. Uh, they only run during certain types of the year. They're not very deep. But Christa's Well actually is kind of an interesting thing. It connects to an underground river that goes out to the ocean. And so there are actually merfolk who go through there, one of the most famous ones being a mermaid named Krista, who communicated with travelers there a long time ago. So they go from Hadaro Raphael to Krista's Well, to the Oasis of Hope. If you can make it that far, you have pretty good hope that you're going to make it to Tel Ben Kodesh. So that's the way that people are supposed to start it. Now there's another way, and it's called the Lukewarm Way. Benavil is a port city, and honestly, if we go up to Nordica, we have the Horselands right up there. It's super navigable, and then you have this little road right down to Tel Ben Kodesh, and so a lot of pilgrims will take that instead and join the Pilgrim's Road there. And it's kind of a thing. You're supposed to get your blessing here at Tel Ben Kodesh because you already walked the Pilgrim's Road. But sometimes maybe you can pay for the blessing, even though you only walked the lukewarm road. And so that is it's seen by a lot of people, by especially the serious ones, as being kind of a poser thing to do. Like, oh, I'm a pilgrim. They're like, yeah, but you didn't start in Hadaro Raphael. You started in Benavil. So anyway, that's one way. Also, there's what they call the Theocrat Road, which is the road that a lot of the members of the council take when they come into the continent from other continents. They land in Ben Shemesh and head up to Tel Ben Kodesh, following the Theocratic Road. And that's also sometimes taken as kind of another lukewarm way for pilgrims at certain points. Then you move on to the Sublime Well. It's really, really pretty. You'll notice up north of there is the emptiness, and it is sandy desert. Not much to it. There is an oasis out there called the Adin, and it is run by Allure, but it's really hard to find. And maybe there's some kind of magic keeping it that way. The legends say that it moves around in the emptiness, and that it'll find like travelers who are really, really holy who get off the road and end up in the emptiness, and will let others, just die. Whether it really moves or not, that's a matter of some debate. Certainly the people who come from there and live there claim it doesn't. But it's just really, really difficult for people to find. So that's out there. The Sublime Well is just this really, really beautiful oasis. And then you take the Pilgrim's Road into the Bloodsand Oasis. And over here we have the Bloodstands, which exist between the Steads and the Oasis, and Noble's Retreat and the Oasis. So yeah, so this is the way it goes to the Bloodsand Oasis, and then to the Wellspring of Faith, and then finally to the High And so there are kind of streams that at certain times of years will run along this. That doesn't mean that you necessarily would prefer to do it during the wet season because there's a lot of flash flooding then. It's really hard. The best thing to do is super hot. This is like I said, the equator runs just like right down here. This is a hot continent. It's a dry continent. Um, it's high on cliffs. There's not a lot of, there's a certain time of year when the clouds actually blow across from here. But you'll see that there's a chain of islands up here. It just stops a lot of the rain. It's a dry, empty continent. But it's super important because of the religion. So let's talk just a little bit about that religion, just to talk about it. Like I said, they ended up with 27 gods. Maybe I'll go through and list those. But before I do that, they have 10 sacraments. 10's pretty important: naming, rebirth, tithing, confirming, marriage, vocation, retirement, Sunday bread, priesthood, and last rites. And if you want to be a clergy member, most of those will require you to go through at least 9 of those sacraments. There's none that require you to go through last rites first. You do that when you die. Some will require you to get out of marriage. So there's that. And some will not require you to go through retirement before you become a priest. So there's different orders of priesthoods corresponding to some of the different gods. So they have those 10. They also have 10 days of the week. They have Sunday, Moon's Day, Star's Day, Stone Day, Air Day, Water Day, Fire Day, Wash Day, Pay Day, and Dance Day. And it's the belief of the council that you should always pay your employees on payday, and then Dance Day is when they spend their money partying and dancing. So they have 10 sacraments, 10 gods, and they have 12 months, and then they have Yule, which is outside of the months. So the first month of they have 3 winter months, or at least they're called winter months. Fido, which is and I won't get too much into what it is because it's because I haven't talked about the gods yet. And Sparrow, Fido, Sparrow, and Ami are the 3 months of winter, or of winter. Then they have what they call the summer months, and this is in the northern hemisphere because the equator is just down here, so it is in the northern hemisphere. And so then the summer months, or the hottest months, are Charis, Phronos, which is the name of also the smaller moon, Ekrasia. Then there are what they call the harvest months, which are Andrea, Dickasun, and Aletheia. So I'm sorry, there are 9 months, and then every month is exactly 30 days. And no, it's exactly 20. Yeah, it's exactly 30 days. So 3 sets of 10 days, 10-day weeks. And then there's Yule. So Yule is Yule occurs at the end of Aletheia. And it can last anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks, depending on 2 things: the moon and the solstice. See, what it is it ends when the month of Aletheia ends, and then it it begins when the month of Olathe ends. And then it ends when you first see the new moon rise over uh, rise, rise over. So it's not a new moon; it's a crescent at that point. Uh, the first new moon after Olathe ends, the first new moon after that. Um, no, the first new moon after the solstice after Olathe ends. So the winter solstice comes, and then Olathe ends, the winter solstice comes, and then the new moon rises, and that's when Yule ends and the new year begins. Right. So of the white moon of Sophia. So those are that's how it works. So it's kind of a little complicated, um, but so yours could end up being slightly different links wrong, but they always like have the solstice, the winter solstice is this unifying thing to get everything back online, and so that's how it works. That's how it works. Um, so 10 days, 10 months, well, 9 months and Yule, 27 gods. So I'm going to talk just a little about those gods. Um, so the first 9 gods I'll talk about are the gods of heaven. Gods of heaven. Uh, they have, like I said, 9 of them, and these correspond to 9 what they call eternal attributes. Um, and so 3 of these eternal attributes, faith, hope, and love, are also correspond to attributes that exist on the high mountain in hell, which are light. Faith is light, hope is twilight, love is darkness. And so they light, faith, hope, and love. And then they correspond to 3 other eternal attributes: beauty, truth, and justice. So this is what the gods of heaven are. So the first is a god named Leipzig. He goes by sometimes the dream giver, the oracle, the eye, the knower. Um, he's a god of faith and beauty, and he gives dreams and visions. Entrepreneurs, oracles, dreamers, visionaries, those are people who really are going to tie to him. His clergy generally carry a mace, and his symbol is the all-seeing eye. So that's the first of the faith or the light gods of heaven. The second of the light gods of heaven is Tritherius, who's the god of epiphany and study. He goes by the name the teacher, the scholar, the oracle, the eye opener. He is really concerns with scholars and studies and study. Scholars, wizards, people who gain magic through study. Teachers really like him. Students really like him. He's the idea of having this moment where revelation happens during the act of study. His clerics generally carry a quarterstaff, and his symbol is an open book. Sometimes the open book actually has writing scriptures on it, but usually it's just kind of lines that sort of look like writing. His favorite animal is the dog. Oh, and I forgot to say, Leipzig's favorite animal is the eagle. Then we have Berlo, who is the god of faith and justice, as noble war, peacekeepers. And he goes by different names: the bear, the Papa Bear, Papa the protector. Knights, warriors, city guards, fathers, werebears. Lots of people who are focused primarily on using their strength to protect worship Berlo. His favorite weapon is a battle axe. His symbol is a bear paw print. Usually it's red on a brown field, and his favorite animal is the bear. So those are the gods of heaven and in the attribute of faith. So faith and beauty, faith and truth, faith and justice. Then we have the gods of heaven in the attributes of hope or twilight. Um, David, the god of youth and sport. Um, he is sometimes called the runner, the wrestler, the young man. He's the god of beauty and hope. Uh, People who like him are people who are into youth, young people, that people into sport. He's the god of dance. He's the god of just people attempting to reach this kind of beautiful physical perfection with their bodies. Um, Athletes, dancers, young people, messengers tend to go for David as a god they relate to. A lot of like barbarian tribes really like David as they see themselves as being strong and powerful compared to the other tribes around them. His clerics generally carry a javelin, and his symbol is an arrow pointed either to the right or to the east. Um, so it's to the right if you're facing north. Um, and so if it's up on a wall, it's usually going to face to the right. If it's down on a platform, it's usually going to face to the east. Um, his favorite animal is the gazelle. The gazelle is often seen as a symbol of David. Then there's Scientia. She's the goddess of, first goddess I've mentioned, I think, so far, of observation and experiment. She's goes by the experimenter, the seeker. Sometimes she's called the method. Um, Her adjective is scientian. And she's really interested in things that can be learned by empirical means, uh, science, observation, experiment. Um, Alchemists like her, investigators like her, uh, astronomers like her. Um, there's also a large extent to which the musicians who are more oriented toward heaven than to the high mountain tend to really like her. Um, you know, Anybody who does a lot of math tends to like her. Um, so those are people, just curious people. A lot of times, if people are just trying to figure something out, they'll invoke Scientia. Um, Her clerics usually carry a blowgun in most of the world, and in areas where gunpowder is a thing, they carry a gun, and that's sort of her symbol. Her favorite animal is sometimes the pig, but that's probably because they are on Tel similar words to our words of guinea pigs are really her favorite animal. But sometimes people will use an actual pig because they've never seen a guinea pig. So she's the goddess, or her eternal attributes are hope and truth. Then hope and justice is scale. The god of the widow and the fatherless. He's sometimes called the law, the lawgiver, the judge. And detractors, people who don't really like scale, will sometimes call him the executioner. Um, his followers are called, or his philosophies are called Scalian. And he's really interested in widows, in fatherless, in judges, in rulers, and making sure that rulers rule with justice. So sometimes he's the god of revolutionaries, right? If you're trying to overthrow an unjust ruler and put a new ruler in place. Um, Lots of the paladins I talked about who protect people along the Pilgrim's Road are paladins of scale. A lot of them are a lot of the knights who travel there. A lot of them are also worshippers of Barlow. Sometimes they worship both. That's fine. You can actually pick and choose as many of these gods as you want, as long as you stick with these gods, and function pretty well in the Council of Clergy's religion. So those are the gods of hope or twilight. So beauty and hope, truth and hope, justice and hope, or beauty and twilight, truth and twilight, justice and twilight. Then we have the gods of love, and we correspond love with darkness. And that might seem kind of strange to some people, that love is darkness because isn't love light. But there's kind of this idea that love is seen by the council as being a private emotion, that love is something that goes on within closed doors, um, which makes it sound like sex. And sex is seen as a part of love, especially by the first of these, uh, the goddess of love and beauty, Anastasia. She's called the mother, the wife, or the midwife. Her philosophy and her clerics are called Anastasian. Um, she's really concerned with marriage, with family, with fertility. You'll see a lot of marriages are performed by clergy who are dedicated to Anastasia, but not all of them. Actually, any of the gods can do the rite of marriage. Um, so that's fine, but you'll see that's something that's like. But even if they do, even if it's like a god of another, a cleric who's dedicated more to another god, there will be her holy symbol, which is the egg, usually planted there somewhere. Uh, Mothers, the betrothed worshiper, but actually anybody who wants really fertility will go to her. So farmers um, and shepherds and stuff will sometimes go to her, and they're like, we want our mothers, our mother sheep, mother cows, our mother wheats to reproduce a lot. So she's kind of like that. Um, she's really associated heavily with the moons, more than most of the other gods or goddesses are. Her symbol is the egg, like I said before. Most of her most of her clerics carry a flail, um, and her favorite animal is the rabbit. So that's Anastasia. The god of love and truth is Jesse. And in their mythology, Jesse is actually the son of Tritherius, the god of teachers. Um, but Jesse is seen as much more as a god of nurturing and education. So not so much the revelation that comes from education, the way uh, really all of these of truth, Tritherian, Scientia, and now Jesse, all that correspond to the study of truth or the philosophy of truth, um, tend to be about education, but truth and love tends to be about nurturing. And that's really the way that it's seen with regard to Jesse. He's seen as somebody who takes care of other people. So he's really interested in study, but not so much to gain knowledge, but just more to build education. He's um, a god of children. If your kids have to go out without you and you're worried about them, you might invoke Jesse to protect your children. Um, he is a god of um, nursing. Um, it's something that he does. He's a god of also not just taking care of sentient beings, but a god of animal husbandry. Would probably be a shepherdry, things like that. He's generally depicted as a shepherd in most iconography, um, and his clerics tend to carry a sling. Um, and his symbol is sometimes a shepherd's crook. Sometimes it's a question mark, because he's the one who you can go with your questions of why, how come, just like a good father, you should be able to say why. Uh, so the last goddess of heaven, the last god of heaven, the last being, corresponds to justice and love. Uh, so justice and love, or justice and darkness, and that is Justora. Um, she's called the Queen, the Lady of the Law, the Virgin Queen, the Secret Queen, and she's really about law, about patriotism, especially in the original etymological meaning, patriotism, as in somebody, your patron, your father. But family loyalty is the really big thing for her. It's she's the one who you'll invoke at a lot of holidays for just like, thank you for bringing us all together, um, and trying hard to work for each other. So family loyalty, and that extends out to patriotism. A lot of times rulers will be interested in her, because it's to their advantage to have patriotic people. Soldiers, patriots, night watchmen really love Justora, because they invoke law where nobody else can. Sometimes vigilantes will invoke her. Uh, that can sometimes be allowed. Um, Good politicians will invoke her. Um, her weapon is the pike. Most of the time, you'll see her clerics carrying a pike and a short spear. And her symbol is a pike with a flag. And her favorite animal is the owl. The owl is generally seen uh, as a symbol of family and loyalty. So that's Justora, and those are all of the gods of heaven. And you'll notice that for the most part, these gods of heaven, they're more about social good than good like finding a box of money good. And so that's what they're about. Then there are 9 gods of the high mountain. So the second group are seen not necessarily, they're not necessarily seen as good or evil, but they're necessary on keeping the world functioning. Um, we'll talk maybe at some point as we get to other continents, because Wahhabit doesn't have any religion besides the Council of Clergy, about the nature of religion, the nature religions. And a lot of times the nature religions, especially if they're wanting to, if they're living in an area where the council has a pretty strong foothold, will use the gods of the high mountain as symbols for their own faith. And so there's sometimes a lot of syncretism between the nature religion and the gods of the high mountain, but we'll talk about that later when we get to nature religion. So yeah, I'm not sure when I'll get to that. I haven't decided what order I'm doing the continents on after Wahhabit, where it's the most important. So the nature religion, their eternal attributes are sky, earth, and sea, and life, luck, and magic. So life is light, twilight is luck, and magic is darkness. And so I'm going to go ahead and, just like I did before, the light ones, or in this case, the life ones. And so the goddess of light and sky is Rena. Rena is called the bird, the swan, the sky queen, the rain mother, the deluge. And her clerics who follow her philosophy are called Renan. She's really interested in weather, in birds, in messengers. She's really interested in things that fly. Is really something that interests her, and in water and rain. Um, she's worshipped a lot by messengers, by people suffering from drought appeal to her. Also, people suffering from flood are sometimes seen as being on her bad side, because she has really very much both a good side and a bad side. The flood is awful. The rain that grows your crops is good, and they are both of Rena. Uh, and so she's kind of seen that way. The clergy who follow her tend to carry a shield, but that shield is kind of relatively small and disc shaped, and is really designed to be thrown. And so sometimes they'll use it as an offensive weapon, or sometimes it's even sharp on the edges, so it can be used as an offensive weapon. And a lot of times it's just ceremonial, but they'll throw it for rituals. There are a lot of rituals for Rena around throwing shields. Um, then we have another goddess. We have Brenna, called the Deer Lady, the fertile soil, the huntress. Her adjectives, Brennan, are her what they call her philosophy and her clerics or her clergy. Um, she's interested in forests and fields. She's life and earth. So anytime when you have life and earth, whether it's forests or whether it's fields, so a lot of like rangers worship her. A lot of times, druids are more the clergy of the nature religion, which isn't on Wahhabit. Uh, but a lot of times, druids will get themselves into the council of clergy by claiming that their goddess is Grena more than any of the others. Farmers, hunters. Um, she's a favorite of the Allure. The Allure just love her. Um, and her clerics or clergy, they're not always clerics like in the class sense from Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or whatever, but they're clergy. The clergy tend to carry a longbow, um, and that generally know how to use it because that's part of their religion. Her symbol is a set of deer horns, and it's generally you can kind of make it by taking your thumbs and fingers, but not getting the palm of your hands and dipping them in ink and then pressing that onto something. That's sort of her symbol. And her favorite animal is the stag. Um, and a lot of times Greta is pictured as, she can be pictured as any of the races, but so mostly, like I said, Allure love her. So a lot of times as Allure, and a lot of times as human, but with antlers like a stag. As a woman, she's always female. So that's life and earth, then life and sea, and that is Nem. Nem is the god of fish and waves. He's called the Mer King, the fisherman, the waves. Uh, People who follow his philosophy are called Nemen. Uh, and really coastal areas, rivers. He's also, though, kind of a god of illusions. This idea that you might see water where there's not any, or you might see things out in the water or that aren't really there. So he's kind of associated with that. Um, Fishermen worship him, whalers worship him, the walrus, the seal hunters up north worship him. I guess down south too. Uh, they worship him. He's just the god of life in the sea. Uh, so his clergymen generally carry a net, and his symbol is just a fish, generally just a line drawing of a fish. Uh, so yeah, and his his favorite animal is a fish. So any kind of fish, it doesn't matter what kind of fish, they're all fish. And so sometimes a dolphin too is his favorite animal. And usually depictions of him are as a mer person, um, no matter what the race of the species of the people who are worshiping him is. It's one of the few where it doesn't kind of depend on who you are to that how you imagine it. Uh, so those are the gods of the high mountain and life. Then there's gods or light, life and light. Then there's the gods of luck or twilight. And one of those is Chick, the god of storms. And Chick is seen as a consort of Rena, and they're kind of a lot of times seen together. Storms and rain sometimes come together, but not always. And Chick isn't necessarily seen as rain in its calm, pleasant form. Chick is rain in it's hitting and is hitting hard, and you don't know what it's going to do. He's called the Striker and the All Smiter, the Hurricane, the Destroyer. Clerics who follow his philosophy are called Chickian. And he's concerned with hurricanes, lightning strikes. Also, even though it's earth, not air, and he's definitely an air god. Sometimes earthquakes and volcanoes are just kind of because it's just him. He's just this intense, powerful being. Um, he's worshipped by people who like that kind of intense power. You know, people brawlers, some barbarians really like him. Profiteers, people who make money off of chaos, really enjoy him because he is very much a god of chaos, very much a god of, you know, you don't really know where lightning's going to strike, or when a tornado comes through town, it'll take one building and leave the other, and it's not like it just takes the buildings of the bad people and leaves them of the good, but you just don't know. You don't know. He's very much a god in terms of that. Um, a lot of Natarians love Chick. They do. His favorite weapon, his clergymen carry around a heavy warhammer, and this can be sometimes an issue. Um, but yeah, his symbol is just a lightning bolt. It's generally drawn with 3 bends in it, and so that's what happens. Um, and his favorite animal is the boar. Always a pig, but always a male pig, and always with tusks. So those are seen as holy to Chick. The other goddess of twilight or luck, and so Chick is of twilight and luck and earth, is Trippa, the goddess of twilight or luck and, excuse me, Chick was twilight or luck and sky. Trippa is twilight and luck and earth. She's the goddess of minerals, and because of that, because so much of the currency is tied to precious metals, she's a lot of times seen as the goddess of wealth. She's called the Golden One, the Lady of Gold and Silver, the Gem Binder. Her clerics, or those who follow her, her clergymen, her clergy people, actually probably mostly women, are called Trippian, that they follow her. She's concerned with wealth, so sometimes buying and selling are really things, but really more opulence, precious metals, gems are really her area of those are the things that people care about. But anything you can mine or draw out from under the earth, whether it's asbestos or gold or uranium, whatever it is that you're drawing out of the earth, that's really what she does. Her clergy generally have a pickaxe. A lot of times it's just ceremonial, and she has 2 kind of symbols. One is just a coin, so seeing that coin there a lot of times can make you understand that this is Trippa. And also the lotus flower, and the reason for the lotus flower is it's seen as it just comes out of the muck and is beautiful. So that's kind of a symbol for Trippa in a lot of ways, and it kind of depends. You tend to see one in one areas and others in others, whether it's the coin or the lotus flower. Our favorite animal is sometimes the badger, and sometimes a frog, and it just kind of depends again on the area where she's being worshipped. Then the last god of luck or twilight and is Trek, who is the god of luck or twilight and water and the sea. Trek is seen as the god of tides, and because of that is very much tied to time. Sometimes he's called Father Time, the inevitable, the seasons or chance, the old man, or sometimes he's called Death. And he's seen very much as the god who facilitates death. Whether you go to heaven or hell or one of the other realms after you die, he's going to be kind of in charge of that passage. So he's he's very much about that, and so sometimes he gets tied to harvest too, even though he is more of a sea god. Trek is usually black, dark. He's associated that kind of Saturnian, in our Roman tradition, but also with a lot of Neptune tied to that. So not quite fitting into either of those, but that very much he's seen as kind of just these things are just going to happen. He's called, one of his titles is the inevitable. You can't change the tide. You can't change that you're going to die. You can't change what time of year it is. He is the god of those things that are. He's an extremely stable god, which is interesting. Because we don't generally think of water as being stable, but he's not stable. He's sort of stable in fluctuation. She should probably be a god of calculus. I don't know if anybody knows calculus yet, because that's where we find stability and fluctuation of math. I think that's the best thing. His clerics generally carry a scythe, and his symbol is the scythe or sometimes a skull. And his favorite animal is the vulture. So he's very much like this is going to happen. The water is going to come in, and it doesn't matter if you're good or bad. He's there for you, and he's gonna do what he's gonna do. And that's kind of his philosophy that his clergy follow. Then there's the gods of darkness and or magic. So the first, I'm just going to continue. I've been going with sky, earth, sea. The first of these is Stray, and he is a god of magic, but magic that you learn. Not magic that comes just like it's something you do. He's not the god of like the leg flu of the Allure. He's much more the god of this is of learning to manipulate things because you figure out how he's very much a skill-based god, very, very powerful. So those who learn magic or similar things by study really like him. He's sometimes called the wizard, the master, or the scribe. And his scribing is very much important to his philosophy. His followers tend to write things down a lot. And in fact, we can really look to Stray as being and his clergy as being super important to the overall health of the Council of Clergy's religion, because he's the one who kind of his followers are the ones who canonize. Is very much what they do. So uh, is is um, it's study, it's learning, and the reason why I associate it with the sky is it's kind of highfalutin. It's like head in the clouds kind of thing. Is very much this is learning how to manipulate the physical. So any kind of seekers of occult or hidden knowledge, librarians like Stray, alchemists. Uh, his clergy people carry a morning star mace, a mace with spikes in it, and his symbol is the candle. And so you'll see a candle drawn on something, and generally it's a mark of Stray. The goddess of earth and magic, or earth and darkness, is Phila. And Phila, I mean, when I talk about her magic, I'm not gonna. It's you might almost say here on Earth, well, that's not magic. Um, that's just hard work, um, and that is very much what she's the goddess of. Um, she's the goddess of craftsmanship, of labor. Uh, she's called the weaver, the carver, the smith, the monk, and she's kind of with this idea that amazing things are accomplished by the use of work, doing things the hard way. That's really, really what it is. And so we wouldn't probably consider that magic sometimes here on Earth, because we don't really know what magic is here on Earth, I think, or we would consider it magic. So they put it in magic and earth. Then magic and water, we have goad. Goad is sometimes called the bard, the sorcerer king, the harper. Uh, he is all about just magic that comes to you, that you have this ability. You didn't do anything to learn it, but you are more of a vessel for it, which is magic and water. You are a vessel for this magic that gets poured in and poured out of you, and that's really, really what you are. People. A lot of times musicians, bards, other artists really like goad, because they like Phila too. And actually Phila is in their mythology married to both Stray and goad. But so that's weird. But anyway, she's both Stray and goad are sons of uh, Scientia. Um, so yeah, they there's very much just like this is the type of magic that just happens, really natural magic. Um, and his clerics, his clergymen, generally carry a crossbow, and his symbol is the harp. Generally seen as, when beautiful music occurs, magic just happens, and we don't know really how that magic works or where it comes from. It's just a tie uh, between skilled art and then just what occurs in the audiences of that skilled art. So those are the gods or goddesses of the high mountain. Now we're going to turn to the gods of hell. And again, the gods of hell aren't really about bad things that happen to people. It's about bad things that people do. Um, and again, they have gods of light, gods of twilight, gods of darkness. And so light is seen in hell as emptiness. If there's light, there's nothing there. And um, so emptiness is light, despair is twilight, and hate is darkness. So um, the other eternal attributes that they have is perversion, lies, and injustice. I wanted to find like a word instead of injustice that means injustice, but doesn't have justice in the word. Um, I couldn't think of one, so that's I've been thinking about nothing that really means, like is lies instead of truth, right? Instead of justice, but all I can think. So we don't. They're not the god of untruths, the gods of lies. They're so I don't. They're gods of lies. It's a thing. Anyway, so I can't think of that. So right now we're still going with injustice as this eternal attribute. So perversion and emptiness, or perversion and light, is Grog. He's the god of intoxication and addiction. He goes by different names. He goes by Demon Rum, Bottle, Pipe, the Bad Doctor. Uh, he's worshipped by drunks. It's not uncommon to go into a place where intoxicants are sold and see a little idol to Grog sitting there. Even though he's a god of hell, he's probably one of the most popular gods of hell for people to openly talk about. Yeah, I'm all into Grog. That's great stuff. Uh, but people who are addicted definitely see him as being the ruler of their life, and whether they're at a stage where they're enjoying their addiction and they love Grog, or at a stage where they hate their addiction and they hate Grog, they definitely see Grog as being uh, tied to that. Um, Generally, a broken glass or clay bottle is carried by his clergy members. And it's just this idea of, this is, I will cut you with this bottle, is sort of his symbol. And the broken bottle is his symbol. If you see a drawing of a broken bottle, or a broken bottle set up on an altar, it's a symbol to Grog. Um, his favorite animal is the skunk, and I probably got that because of being drunk as a skunk. That's his thing, but it's also skunks stink. You don't really want to be around them, but they're so cute. Oh my goodness. And so a lot of that really fits well with Grog. There's like this attraction there to something that is not going to end well. Um, so that's Grog. Also, the god of emptiness and lies is Zed. Zed is a god of demigods and con artists. He goes by, sometimes they call him the false scale, the sophist, the cheat, the silver tongue. I call him Zedian. Um, his areas of concern are cons and tricks and public speaking. I'm a public speaking teacher, so the fact that I would give this to a god of hell is problematic. But anyway, cons, tricks, speaking. Um, con artists will invoke Zed to help them. Liars will invoke Zed to help them. Demagogues will invoke Zed to help them if they're aware that they're demagogues. Um, so yeah, his clergy carry a dart, a lot of times a poisoned dart that they throw, uh, and if you see a picture of a scale, but one side is heavier than the other, even though there's nothing on the scale, that's a symbol of Zed. Um, and his favorite animal is the fox. So that's Zed. Abzala is the goddess of injustice and emptiness, or injustice and light. She's the goddess of tyrants, of like crime lords, the dawns of the organized crime family. She very much likes organization. Very much. She likes evil laws to be in place. She's the goddess of slavery and tyranny. Um, she's worshipped by slave masters. Slavery is there are like there's a region in central Nordica where slavery is not allowed, and on the Dragon Islands, slavery is not allowed. Otherwise, slavery is all over Tel. And she is ruler of that. So even though she is a goddess of hell, you'll see a lot of times people who run slave auctions or something like that, because slavery is seen as evil, but most places see it as a necessary evil to keep things functioning. And so they will invoke this goddess of this necessary evil. Um, her animal is the vulture too, uh, just like uh, just like Trek's animal is the vulture. It's kind of seen in different ways. Um, and she, her clerics generally, her clergy people generally carry uh, a long whip. That's sort of her symbol. And she's not only invoked though by out and out evil people. It's anytime when people are like, we're going to have to lay down the law, and lay it down in a way that's going to hurt, because it's got to be done. Those people are going to invoke Josala, the goddess of hell, a goddess of hell, a goddess of emptiness and injustice. So just like, you know what, it's not fair, but we got to get this done. So those are the gods of emptiness. The gods of despair or twilight are next. The gods of perversion and twilight is the goddess of perversion, and twilight is Gilda. She's a goddess of pimps, prostitutes, sexual promiscuity. That's really what she is. She goes by the name of the whore or madam, the wandering eye. People who follow her philosophy are called Gildan, and she's interested in prostitution and infidelity and sex um, outside of the bounds of a committed relationship. That's really what she's looking for. Um, and so pimps, prostitutes, adulterers, people who are being promiscuous might invoke Gilda, either to hide or to bring in customers or something like that. Uh, she's generally seen with a dueling sword. Is kind of is shown on her. She's usually shown as a woman riding a camel, um, with sometimes with horns. A lot of times with horns. A woman riding a camel with horns, and her favorite animal is the camel. Uh, so yeah, that's Gilda. Then there's the god of despair, and which is twilight, despair, and lies, which is Mince, who is the god of gambling and cheating. He goes by the rat, the the gambler, the cheat. And he's very much interested in gambling. His worshippers are gamblers, cheaters, thieves. Those are people if you're going to gamble, you might go in and either propitiate against other people who propitiate so that you can abjure people who might be cheating, uh, but more likely to say, come on, cheat on my side. Uh, his weapon is a switchblade. That's his favored weapon. Um, that's what clerics will kind of do. Them kind of you hide it, you pull it. His symbol is two six-sided dice, each showing one pip, and his favorite animal is the rat. Specifically, really large dire rats are important to him, and so that's what they do. The next goddess is Josala. Um, she's the goddess of thievery and assassins. She goes by the title, the fortuitous hand, the hand. Um, she's in charge. She's the goddess of despair and injustice. She's all about killing people for political reasons. She's and stealing for profit. Um, Assassins, thieves, burglars really like her. Her clerics always prominently carry a dagger, and a dagger is her symbol. So a drawing of a dagger, a lot of times you're invoking Josala. Then we have the ones I like the least, the gods of hate. I almost don't want to talk about them. The gods of hate or darkness. So the gods of hell and darkness are these three, or the gods of hell and hate are these three. And the first is Shav, who is the god. So he's a god of hate, darkness, and perversion. And he's the god of rape and of incest. He's called the Ravager, or the Dark Father, or the Nightmare. Uh, he is worshipped by rapists, by molesters, um, by people in incestuous relationships, um, as helping them with their evil. Is just bad. Um, but there are clergy of him who a lot of times they'll say, well, we're here to propitiate against him. We're here to help us subdue ourselves from Chav, from our situations. But I wouldn't trust any of his clergy around my wife or children. Um, he's bad. He's bad. Um, his his clergy have like claw blades, kind of like Wolverine used to originally do before it was retconned and they just came out of his body. These kind of things that you'd keep on the side. Uh, his symbol is like a smiley face, but like bigger on one side. So it kind of looks like he's winking sometimes with a wink, one eye closed. His favorite animal is the hyena. He's just a really bad god. Um, and so is Zan, the god of hate, darkness, and lies. So Shav was perversion and hate. Zand is lies and hate. And so he's really the god of gossip and false statements. Most of these gods, they appear as kind of a picture of whatever race is worshiping them, whatever species worshiping them. When Zand appears, it's almost always as a anthropomorphic bird, um, usually a black anthropomorphic bird. He's called the gossip, the father of lies, the little bird, the slanderer. He's interested in lies, falsehood, and helping people break oaths. Gossip, hurtful gossip, is something that he's really interested in. Uh, so sometimes people will like burn a candle to Zand, and a lot of times they'll sacrifice a starling to Zand to stop false gossip that's going around about them, with the idea that we can praise Zand and that he'll stop working his ideals. But other times people are like, I want to hurt somebody, so they'll invoke Zand to hurt somebody with gossip and lies, and that's really what it's about. He's very much about using lies. All of these, Zed is a god of lies, Mintz is a god of lies, and Zand is a god of lies. All of these kind of ideas of lies are part of what he does. And so, yeah, that's Zand, and that's his ickiness. Then there's Benz. He is the god of hate and of injustice, and he is the god of murderers and brawlers. Uh, for him, so hate is darkness, murderers and brawlers. He's called the fighter, the thrasher, the beast. He's very much if you want to commit murder or you want to engage in violence, he's very much a god that you would go to for that. Murder, brawling, fighting, etc. Um, that's his thing. Um, his clergy tend to carry broadswords. Oh, I didn't think I said about Zand. His clergy tend to carry a sap, kind of a tiny little heavy piece of leather, heavy piece of metal or rocket side of leather just to smack somebody with. And his symbol is a bird with music notes. But Ben's clerics generally carry a broadsword. And if you see his symbol, it's a single broadsword driven through a heart. Um, yeah, so that's Ben's. He is all about just killing people for for fun and profit. All about, but not not the way that Josala is about killing people by sneaking in and killing them. Is like we're just going to go in and just bash their heads in, we're gonna slash them up. No subtlety bets. That's who he is. So he's a good god, a bad god. He's an interesting god. So clearly, we can see on all of this that with gods of hell really placed as prominently as gods of heaven in the pantheon, the council is not exactly anti-evil. Things like murder, thievery, rape, incest, addiction, slaving, and lying are seen as necessary to the continuance of life. It's not like people say these things are okay. That's not what it is. It's not like the clergy's like, well, this is. It's just that, and in fact, all governments controlled by the council or heavily influenced by the council, uh, they at least regulate these things, if not completely outlaw them. But there's a recognition that these things happen, that a murderer lies in each of us, and they kind of feel like it's better to acknowledge it and then either make provision for it in appropriate ways and times and places, or find some way to propitiate against it. So that is the religion that is the dominant religion throughout Tel. And it comes from this one continent called Wahhabit, which is generally drawn at the center of the world, probably because their religion is it's a desert continent. Uh, it's uh, not terribly heavily populated. It's not a very big continent, uh, but in some ways it's the most important and the one I've spent the most time on. I'm not going to spend this much time on any of the others because this really influential religion is from there, and the council actually meets in Tel Ben Kadash and then sends out their missionaries from there. So yeah, it's pretty important. And I'll go ahead and now I think what I'll do is I think I'll move on to Nordica, because Nordica is makes sense kind of here because the religion, that's where it first moved north, and it actually there's almost as strong a hold in Nordica, at least in southern Nordica, as there is on Wahhabit itself. All right, so Nordica. Nordica is, I promise I won't spend as much time on Nordica as I spent on Wahhabit, um, because um, because this would make it into probably a 16-hour movie, and I was planning this whole thing to be just like 45 minutes, and we're already over 2 hours. So yeah, I don't think anybody will ever actually watch it because of that. So this is my view of Nordica. Nordica is a really cool place to be, and I mean that maybe literally, especially up north. It is extremely cold. Actually, the Great Mountains here are very cold. They're part of the same range that the high mountains are, where Nordica, Cambria, Wahhabit, and Sara even kind of all push together and make this massive mountain range. So that's one of two mountain ranges. Um, one of two mountain ranges in sorry, one of two mountain ranges in Nordica, the Great Mountains, and then the Silver Mountains. And both the Great Mountains and the Silver Mountains are dominated primarily by Sven. Those are a lot of who live there. The Great Mountains are really probably the the origin of all Sven in the world. And then the Silver Mountains are a little colony off of that, primarily dominated by Sven. Um, the rest, if we were to look at it down here from the border of Sina and the Shires, and yeah, I'm taking that from Tolkien because I love him. So you can do whatever you want to about that. But anyway, the border between Sina and the Shires, all around the Silver Mountains, clear over here until the Brimstone Hills, and even there's a lot in Brimstone Hills. That this area is all dominated heavily. I'd say, well, especially in this area, you'd probably say probably close to 70% of the population are human. When we get over here, there's a lot more dwellers. Uh, and yeah, that's because when I was originally thinking about the dwellers, I started out with hobbits, but I think they've developed from there into something different than hobbits or D&D halflings. But anyway, and so really this area, well, even into Slingers has uh, a lot of dwellers, but this area, what we call the Horselands, is dominated primarily by by humans. And this area up here, we call this the Allure Emirates, and all of these borders are ruled by Allure. Now there are cities there, and some of those cities, I'll go ahead and zoom in. Bella, Mammoth Springs, Principia, Byron, Shelley, Hale. Yes, I love them too. So uh, Aroxia, Ivory. Those cities are mostly humans. There is one here called Ort Garrison, and yeah, that's because I was originally thinking in a Tolkienian way. But Ort Garrison, this area right in here, that's a city, but it is an Atarian city, so not human. Otherwise, the cities are mostly human, uh, but even then, the majority of the people here in the Allure Emirates are Allure. Um, the majority of the uh, people in the Brimstone Hills are kind of an interesting. There's a huge number of what are they? They are dwellers here at the Kindly Cow and in Shady Oaks. Just a huge number of those, and but primarily the Brimstone Hills are dominated by kind of almost you could say a subspecies of Sven that are a little different than Sven everywhere else. They got heavily crossed with Allure at one point, and so they're not quite as subterranean. And they're different. They're different culturally. So yeah, Brimstone Hills are also called that. It's volcanic. It hasn't been active in thousands of years, but it is volcanic, and so it is active in another way. It's active kind of like the way Yellowstone in on on Earth in the United States is active. We have this little area here in the square called the Eight Town Regions. That's kind of cool. It's arguably part of the Silver Mountains, arguably part of the Brimstone Hills, partly Allure Emirates, and partly Horselands. So what happened is there was um, a ruler among the Allure. His name is Latish, and so this is T-Shell. Anyway, there was a ruler among the Allure, and what happened is uh, there was a war between two different groups of Sven. And one group of Sven kind of drove the others out, and they heavily used uh, Natarians to do it. And so they kind of used Natarians as shock troops to start to drive the others out. And then kind of decided from there that they would let those shock troops loose in here to take it. And Latish didn't like that. So he hired 8 human mercenary troops to take over this, to help him maintain order in this region. And he said if he did that, he would give them land. Well, Allure live a lot longer than humans. So he kind of figured, they'll live for 60 years and then they'll be dead. Then their kids will probably be dead. It's not going to last very long. The funny thing that happened, though, you kind of feel sorry for him, is he didn't necessarily think that their kids would have kids and their kids would have kids and their kids would have kids. So there are probably about probably about 60,000 people living in this area that are humans, and so that's kind of a thing. They're sort of culturally up from the Horselands. So Horselands are called the Horselands. Down here we have Wahhabit. There's Fireport. There's Benavel. And this island is Bella. I should mention it because there's a city there. But anyway, this area was traditionally, it had a lot of humans and a lot of dwellers. The dwellers may have originated in this area, and humans came in over the Great Mountains and settled here a long, long time ago. But they were primarily nomadic, primarily tribal. And what happened is really missionaries from down in Wahhabit came up and they started to spread their religion. And so this is kind of the dominant religion. The Council of Clergy is the dominant religion, really, probably all through this area. Well, in the Great Mountains too. So probably all through this area, it's sort of the dominant religion. And as they spread, they kind of set up a different system than they really have in Wahhabit. This is a lot closer to a feudal system than the more tribal system that they kind of still run by. And it's not a theocracy up here. Various lords are not necessarily tied directly to the Council of Clergy. They're different, and so yeah, this is kind of an interesting thing. I kind of wanted to. There's regional spirits that I kind of wanted to talk about, but again, after I took as long as I did down on Wahhabit, I didn't want to spend too much time about that. But there are a few like powerful dragons, especially right up here. There was one right in here. And there's some powerful undead and a few things like that. There's also 2 dragons down in Wahhabit. I never mentioned those. So maybe we should just stick with not mentioning regional spirits. But anyway, so this is Nordica, and it is a very cool place. There are there are lords and there are politics. Oh, the Freelands. The Freelands are cool too. The Freelands are like the Horselands, but the Horselands, the Freelands is really just this area. Are like the Horselands culturally and even religiously, but they have decided not to allow slavery. And also the 8 Towns Charter doesn't allow slavery. The rest of the continent and most of the world. Slavery is pretty much a fact of life. But in these two areas, they don't practice slavery. And here in the Freelands, they make that really their defining feature. They protect slaves. You can go there if you are a slave, and they won't let your slave catchers come. They do come and they catch slaves, but they don't. It's illegal. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of an interesting area, and this up here is kind of an interesting area. So that is Nordica. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and just jump right here to uh, Sarah. Yeah. So let me just do it this way. Nope, that's not going to work. Why won't it work? There we go. Oh, that's kind of a cool thing. Let me go back. This is if we divided them up by races. I did this for Pathfinder, so you see Pathfinder races there. But anyway, so yeah, Sarah. There's my. You've seen that. Okay, there's Sarah. Sarah is another continent. It is south of Wahhabit, and it is. So there's been Shemish, which you saw on Wahhabit, then Hamish, Garsnik, the Sven, the opening to a Sven tunnel system. Luftschloss is another opening to a Sven tunnel system. But Sarah is hot. It is an extremely hot continent. As we get down into here, it gets a little less hot, but it's not cold. They would have winters there in the summer. Sarah, the cities that we have here are primarily humans. You're going to find that everywhere. That cities are primarily humans, although Manara here is actually there's a lot of humans there, but it's also an entrance into the Sven tunnel system. It's hot, it's humid, whereas in Sara to the north, basically all the water that would come up into Sara is diverted by the Fire Islands, so it doesn't quite come down into Wahhabit. So it is diverted by the Fire Islands and kind of pushes down into Sara and pushes into Sara. And so this whole area is just extremely wet. And it is populated, like I said, the cities have humans, but it's primarily populated by Saurons, and after Saurons, Allure. Because it is so hot, most creatures here, including Allure and Saurons and humans, if they have any hair at all, it tends to be short and small. People tend to be darker skinned. The Allure here tend to come in anything from like a chestnut brown to a kind of a deep dark blue. I guess I'd call it a it's just a deep dark, almost sapphire blue that you would see on a lot of the Allure in this area. And everybody tends to have really close hair because you don't want your hair to get you too hot. So really close curly hair. Everybody tends to have that, except for the Sven. The Sven have kind of longish hair, but they never see the sun. But it's an incredibly wet place. Lots of jungles. Lots of fighting. All of these rivers are navigable, and there are basically no roads in Sara. If you want to travel to various cities, you do it by water, because otherwise it's just any place where there's not enough vegetation to soak up water. So any place where you try and like build a road or something, it's just going to turn into mud. It's just really a mess. lots of, again, regional spirits there. And I was, in my original plan, I was going to talk about all of those, beings who are not quite gods. The Council of Clergy does have influence on most of the cities, not so much down here, but most of the cities, not Bawa either. Bawa. So, but it has quite a bit of influence. Down here, it has a little less, and people tend to much more go with smaller, uh, more local gods that they serve, and the regional spirits I was going to talk about. Sven are part of the Council of Clergy, although they only worship the goddesses. Um, well, they like the gods anyway. But yeah, these rivers are all navigable, and to either side of them, though, is dense swamps. Then it goes into jungles, primarily jungles. The jungles start to turn into forests more in this area, and those jungles are populated by Saurons and Allure. And I should probably mention that there are dinosaurs on Sara. If you don't like dinosaurs in your fantasy, that's fine. You don't ever have to go to Sara. I haven't written any novels that include Sara yet. I haven't ever even included it in my Pathfinder game, so it doesn't really matter. But in my mind, Sara exists, and I am a boy. I'm a 46-year-old boy by the time probably this video is done. Uh, I'm a 46-year-old boy, but I was once a 6-year-old boy. And boys like dinosaurs. And if I'm going to fantasize about a world, I'm going to put dinosaurs in that world. So Sara has dinosaurs. All the dinosaurs from all the eras of dinosaurs that did not exist together on most pictures of the world, most timelines that are done by scientists, the say, Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus never lived together, but man, it's cool to watch them fight in old shows. So I'm going to watch them fight here when I imagine Sara. It's important to me. So that's Sara. So we've kind of done, if we wanted to, we've kind of done this middle part of the map. So I think what I'll move to next is Cambria. Oh, isn't this cool? You get to see all my maps. Cambria, here we go. Cambria is a long continent, long, narrow. You might even not want to consider it a continent. It's really where the continents of, well, yeah, okay, here's Luftschloss, which we just put on Wahhabit. These are the Great Mountains that we just put in Nordica, and then we have, this Luftschloss that we just put in Sara, the High Mountains in Nordica, and then here from Wahhabit. So Cambria is a long continent, very culturally varied. Again, you can say the cities that we have here are primarily human. The woods, which it's a heavily wooded area, are primarily Allure. There are a few Saurons down in this area, but they are not common. Natarians do live throughout the continent, and are pretty happy there. And so all of that's kind of interesting. It's wet. It's a wet continent. Really more foresty in the north, and kind of jungly in the south, with some really nice savannas in these areas. Some really good farm country up in here. So, culturally varied, geographically varied. Yeah, I think every race lives here. So let's talk about the Maelstrom. The Maelstrom is an interesting geographical feature. It's not a constant maelstrom, although there are always really strong ocean currents in there. If you toss somebody in, they're going to die. But it depends on the phases of the moons, or not the phases of the moons, the positions of the moons with regard to Tel. And at certain times, just kind of all of the water just sucks to the other side of the world through an underground tunnel. And it just kind of just does. It makes this massive maelstrom that's kind of protected this continent in a lot of ways from culture, because you've got the big mountains over here kind of keeping it away. And so the Council of the Clergy really never got the huge hold that they have, even in Nordica, even though this is fairly close to. I mean, this is a Hobbit right here. This is the Great Mountain is like just off on this edge here. So but it just never really did become quite as full. Although, probably in every town you could find something of a chapel to the Council of Clergy. Now, probably the big exception actually is up north here, the Duchy of Coldwater and Sapna. In both those places, the Duchy of Coldwater is it is a horse lord land, just like you'd find in Nordica. That's really what it is. There is, I don't want to get too much into regional spirits because, like I said, that's going to take all day. But there is a regional spirit who's really important there. He's an undead duke. When he was alive, he went exploring from Nordica up into this area. He was very wealthy and everything. And while he was there, he and his porters, his troop, became undead. And well, they died. And I guess what you could say is they died, and that didn't stop them from establishing a colony. The colony is not primarily undead. There are maybe hundreds of undead throughout the whole area. But he started to bring his family over, and he gave his family a lot of protection. And so this is really a Nordican horse lords area, to be perfectly honest. And Sapna too is a Nordica horse lords area. Sapna, I don't want to get too much into regional spirits again, but there's a silver dragon who lives right up in here. Anyway, there's the rest of this though is culturally the Council of Clergy might have a church here and might have 3 clergymen in Naroda, but that doesn't mean it. All of these areas, most areas you'll see the capital city is the name of the political area, and it tends to be humans who rule, even though the humans are a majority in Cambria. They're a slight majority compared to Allure, and Sven lives all through the mountains to the west, the mountains to the east, and all through this central mountain range. There are Sven. So quite a few of those. Natarians, like I said, do live here. There's a tiny number of Saurons. These islands. This one is generally called Cranny, and this one is called Davi. And lots of Sven live in those islands, and humans, but also a lot of Allure live in those islands. So that is the central continent. I call it central because of this super mega continent. It is right in the middle, and you might not even, I'm not sure that it necessarily functions as a continental plate. I think that it's just where several continental plates press together, and push and push and push and make this area. So that's Cambria, and so probably where I'd want to go next, if I could, would be to Mercia. So that starts with an M. Isn't it fun to get to see all these again? Or get an advanced view of them? We'll get to all of them. Mercia. Mercia is a cool continent, especially up north. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. Uh, this is where two major people groups originated, for sure. The humans come from who? Right up in here. I don't want to probably talk too much about ancient geology, but there's a mass extinction event called the warping, and at and up in this area, uh, it was separated from a lot of the horrible things that were happening, and humans managed to survive here. Most of them are kind of tribal and nomadic. They go out on the polar ice and hunt, uh, but there are some more settled ones, and it kind of humans are really what spread out from here, and that's really where it started, uh, and spread all through the rest of the world. Um, so there are a lot of humans here. There are a lot of humans throughout the continent, but another people group that really started here was the Allure. The Allure started right down in here. This used to be part of a much larger continent, and that continent was really messed up by the warpings. And all that was really left of it was this area here. And there were Allure living in there who spread. They spread here through Velethar, where this is I mean, there are two human cities here, but otherwise, this is Allure. Probably some Sven living here, but I haven't really thought about them that much. All through here, and then they also spread down through islands. Down here, we have the continent of Aspasia, which I'm not sure. I might do that next, partly because I think that'll be my good thing. But down there's a continent of Aspasia, and they spread down into there. They spread all through the islands. These Maya and Hua are actually uh, part of the Fire Islands, so we'll do those as part of a separate map. Um, but yeah, primarily humans. Uh, they have because humans have been here so long, they have really dense cultural experience, a really rich cultural experience that they draw from, and memories of empires going back thousands of years, and they they keep track of it. Oh, this is kind of a Kwang is an interesting city. It's on top of a mountain, major waterfall come out, but there's actually a diversion from right up here, which would make this into a much bigger river, an underground diversion that some Sven did in order to do that. Although the city Kwang is primarily inhabited by humans more than anything else, so um, very much the humans have a very honor-based culture, very much about saving face and stuff like that. It's a beautiful and varied continent. It stretches a long way down below the equator, to up above. This is the equator right here, to up to the Arctic. So it's a very large and varied, culturally varied, geographically varied, mountains, plains, rivers, hills, coasts, cities, farms, rural areas, very varied continent. Um, so yeah, I think I'll talk about Aspasia. Oh, the Council of Clergy. The Council of Clergy. You know what? If we were going to really talk about the Council of Clergy, has been very influential among humans, but not up here where humans originate, but all throughout the rest of the world. You'll see primarily Council of Clergy getting uh, a foothold in these coastal cities, but honestly, it's not the biggest deal here. There's a lot more of the traditional. Uh, Actually, there's a lot of ancestor worship and worship of regional spirits. So I think I'll go back to Aspasia. And Aspasia, we're going to go all the way back. Aspasia starts with an A. So you get to see all this stuff. This is, yeah, remember Villavet? Used to be all like that. That was a long time ago. Anyway, so Aspasia. There, I just went past it. Aspasia is the least populated continent with sentient species. Plenty of animals, but the least populated with sentient species. And really interesting thing about Aspasia is that uh, they have no like central government. There are city states here uh, that are primarily human, so little city states, and they have various Allure tribes in the jungles. And so this is a really interesting thing. We mostly think of Saurons as living in Sara, for first of all, and we also think of them as being very sylvan, not arboreal like Allure, but sylvan. Um, and so we usually think of them as that. But this desert area here, in fact, they call this town Fort Reptile, because Saurons aren't really reptiles, but man, they look like they are. So anyway, this desert here is, I don't want to say heavily populated with Saurons, but there are more Saurons there than there are any other thing. So an interesting thing about Aspasia, like I said, they've held off from the Council of Clergy, and they've sort of become a place where people go to flee from the Council of Clergy when the Council of Clergy hunt them down. There's one city here. It's really difficult to get to. So you would have to uh, come in on this river, and you'd then go through there, and you get that. It's called Heretics Retreat, and it is primarily a uh, a place where heretics go, according to the Council of Clergy. It's a place they can run to. It's be really hard to get tracked down by various interesting paladins and those hunting heretics. Be a good place to go if you're in a lot of trouble. So that's Aspasia. There is up to the north. You see, this area would be probably jungle. Elder God is a fairly large city, and they worship this sea demon who lives out in there. It's a fairly big city, but the rest, I mean, there's probably, when I say fairly big, there's maybe 200,000 people in it, but a fairly big city of humans. But yeah, primarily jungle up in there, some jungle in this area, but coming down to wood areas. To kind of give you an idea, as you head south, there's a series of cities, kind of like the Eight Towns region is a series of towns that they call the Spruce Way, which is kind of a road between these two rivers and stops along it. And there's a lot of spruce trees in that area. Bookery is an interesting place. For a while, when the Council of Clergy was banning certain books, a lot of people fled with their books to right here. And so there's this library there, even though there's now maybe 9,000 people. Oh, if we count the Allure that live around here, there's probably 30,000 people living in this area. But this library that people go to. So yeah, this is Aspasia. It is the least populated continent. It has been protected from the Council of Clergy. People do not worship the Council of Clergy there. Also, I should probably mention that there's one of the other religions, the nature religion, or not the nature, the love religion, is really based here in Parrot Head. It's really based there, although it's spread throughout the rest of the world. And those are people who worship love as a mono deity, and so that's important. And so I just didn't mention the nature religion. I should have done that when I talked about Nordica. The Council of Clergy. Let's just go ahead and go back to Nordica. We'll go ahead and just do that. You get to see everything again. That was fun. All right, so Nordica. That's another way of seeing Nordica with a little less information. But anyway, here's Nordica. So anyway, the Council of Clergy really rules, like I said, the through the shires, all into here. Up north, people might primarily follow what's generally called the nature religion, which sees nature as a monodeity, and that's actually a pretty common religion throughout the world too. So, and it's pretty common in Sara as well. Um, so, yeah, those are that's Nordica. What should I do next? I should probably do. Uh, I think I've done that's all every dragon in the world. This isn't a very good map, but it does give you every dragon in the world, and so you can see a lot of them are up here. Um, anyway, so it's not really every dragon. It's every dragon over a certain age and size. But anyway, let's see. Probably what I'd want to do next. I want to do the Dragon Islands last. So what I'm going to do is the Fire Islands first. Um, no, before those, so second to last. So these are the Fire Islands. They are bordered by the Mer Sea in the north, which is, I mean, there's merfolk all over the oceans, but there are a lot of them in the Mer Sea. They have well, there's a lot of like ice that they can crawl up on to sun themselves. There are, these islands that they can get onto in the Dragon Islands. So, lots of places where they can get to rest and breathe. And so the Mercy up there is that's a lot of mer people. And then the Great Sea to the south. But anyway, Maya and Pua showed up in this is Mercia, but Maya and Pua showed up in those maps. Uh, Akame, Hayu, Toblin, Dafiti, Aloria. So you can guess who lives there. Messenia, Wayland, and the Seminary Island. So let's do the Seminary Island. The Seminary Island is Wahhabit. It is now. Wahhabit is just down here, not too far away. But it's Wahhabit, and it was like really this first place where they went out and were like, oh, the Council of Clergy is too far away to go back to train our clergymen, so we'll see if we can set up. And they got permission to set up the first seminary there. Now there's seminaries everywhere. They can get 18 clergy together. They start a seminary. But yeah, this is Seminary Island is Wahhabit culturally, although there's a lot of lore in here. There are a lot of allure in Alluria, just quite a few. Generally, we talk about humans, if they go to Alluria, are generally talking about these northern cities. But yeah, as far as politics go, there's a lot of going back and forth. Most of the Fire Islands, other than Seminary Island, have off and on been politically part of the Dragon Island uh, political system, but not always. And sometimes they've chosen to be independent. Uh, and sometimes they're tied together, and sometimes they're independent of each other. So there's different kinds of political things that can go on here. Once in a while, somebody from Thaddeus over here in Messiah will attempt to take over. Usually, Pua tends to be the one they fight over. You'd think, hey, but that's not how it is. So anyway, these are the Fire Islands. They're primarily human and a lot of Allure. I mean, yeah, I bet it's about 50-50 human and Allure. There are a few Sven who live right in here. But if there are Saurons, there's not very many. If there are Natarians, there's not very many. So that's the Fire Islands. The Fire Islands are part of a volcanic ring of islands, with sort of its center being the Dragon Island, which is my favorite part of Tel. So I'm going to go ahead. Let's look at this as a good one to use. So the Dragon Island, again, I don't want to get too much into regional spirits, but there is a golden dragon named Benshi who lives in the central volcano of the Dragon Island. And he has made treaties between the various regional spirits who live in these areas and their rulers. And the treaties are kind of interesting. And so those treaties make it so that there is no slavery on the Dragon Islands, that there's certain rules requiring rights for genders, and that there's a certain amount of autonomy, but within the regions, but free trade and stuff like that. So the Stone Snows are primarily home to Sven. Now, the one novel I've written the first draft of, which is the only real novel, takes place almost entirely in the Stone Snows. But Sven are barely mentioned because they are mentioned. There's one really important one, but are barely mentioned because it takes place primarily on the surface. So there's Locke often figures prominently in that story. So yeah, that's the Stone Snows are up there. Lock Off, Ice Lock, and Skylock are the three biggest major entries into the Sven tunnel system that stretches all through here. It is cold. Summers are short. Harvests are short. Probably for half the year, Summerport is not a port. It's there's ice. It's all frozen in. So Stone Snows are cold, and actually the whole island of Dragon Island should be really, really cold, except for it's volcanic, and that keeps it warm. But there's a limit to how much that's going to keep it warm on just a daily basis. So the Stone Snows, Semnia is entirely Allure. There's this area here that's kind of a city where humans are a lot, called the Fey Fair, and humans are there a lot, but they don't live there all year. It's just kind of in the summers it opens up, and then as winters come, the humans get in their ships and go elsewhere. So really heavily Allure. The bayou area here is humans. Honestly, they're mostly humans, strange as it is, because this is they're primarily humans from Sara. And there was a reason for that, a cultural reason, when a whole bunch of Saurons were taken up as slaves to work this area here. It's kept warmer because it's volcano, and there's also a really warm current that comes right into here. It warms up this area and makes it warmer than it should be. And so it's kind of swampy in there. If there probably there are under 1,000 Saurons as uh, the race or the species on the entire island. But if there are any who aren't just sort of interlopers, they'd be in this area, and the humans who are Saurons live there. The wildlands are interesting. Again, I don't want to get too much into regional spirits, but there's this temple to Mariel. Mariel was she was a goddess, and or at least she thought so, and everybody else thought so. But she found out people were doing human sacrifices to her, which she didn't really know. So she decided to wipe out civilization. And they still kind of have this rule here of, in her region, the wildlands, which is just pretty big, really. Uh, People only live in tents. There's no permanent living, and that's of the humans. Allure never really built civilizations the same way, and Sven don't really either. And kind of various tribes and anyway, now she's an ally of the dragon, and it's okay. She's not going to wipe out all of civilization. But part of the agreement is she gets to keep this. The Beastlands are an interesting area. The Beastlands are primarily, they were settled by people from the Glass Sands, but they were settled by as kind of an area where people could go who struggle with lycanthropy, which is a horrible disease. Horrible disease. More horrible for some than for others, but absolutely not something you do. This here is not a river. This is lava flow, right here, and it's kind of a perpetual lava flow. It goes to one side, then the other. Near that lava flow is the Temple of Reason, which is technically in the Glass Sands. In fact, the political ruler of the Glass Sands is the principal of the Temple of Reason. The Temple of Reason is kind of the central point for people who conceive of reason as a monodeity, and this religion also is popular throughout the world. It's honestly probably the second most popular. Now, probably the third most popular. Probably those nature religions where people just perceive nature as a monodeity is the second most popular. Than reason is most popular. The towers area here is an area based on several towers. And these are really, really tall towers that were at one time used to warn people about invaders, but not so much anymore. The eastern dunes here are cold desert. The walled lands are interesting. When the Dragon Island was first colonized by Allure, and then it was colonized by humans from Aspasia. You can kind of see how they got there. So they became the primary human force. Then it was colonized by humans from Wahaba and Nordica, and they started to drive the other humans away. And the walled lands built this wall to keep the Arspasian culture separate, and they did, and they also committed genocide on any Allure, and they kept Sven out. And so this is one of the most human areas that there is even today. Now Allure are allowed in. They're allowed in under the Pax Dracona, the Peace of the Dragon. They're the treaties that all this area has signed. They're allowed in now. So it's different than Aspasian culture because it's been separate for hundreds of years. So it's different than Aspasian culture, but you definitely see a lot of the Aspasian influence in the people who live here. The Chowsing mists are an interesting phenomenon. The lava comes right in here and hits some kind of water pocket that just becomes this perpetual mist right in here, and this whole area is hard to see. So I think I did the eastern dunes. The eastern dunes are cold desert. Arendelle is an island that connects to the. It is 100% of the year, even in the summer. In the north, it connects to a perpetual ice sheet, and so that's all it is. Arendelle is cold. It is icy. The people who live there are primarily fishermen. They are primarily humans. And then there's a few Sven up here and a few Allure in there. A lot of Allure live down here on the Bear Island. The Bear Island is part of the Dragon Islands, and it's got a lot of bears, and it's kind of shaped like a bear, just a little. I don't know. It might be hard to see it, but maybe it was more shaped like a bear before the river started to wash this away. Anyway, mostly Allure, but several cities, small cities of people. Uh, so yeah, that's the Dragon Island, and the Dragon Island's actually my favorite. So why didn't I spend more time on the Dragon Island than I did on Wahhabit? Because Wahhabit is culturally just a little more important, and that's why. That's why. And so we'll stop there. I've got the Mersey, the Great Sea, the North Sea. Anyway, we'll go ahead and stop there as far as our geography goes. And that's really sort of a good place to stop at this point. You have an understanding of the basic geography of the world. Um, and so I don't know, I kind of doubt ever anybody will actually watch all the 3+ hours of this story. If you do, let me know in the comments, as they always say. I'll be really impressed with you, um, because I was planning on doing this as like a 20-30 minute video, and it turned into this, and it is still just an introduction to all of this. There's things I didn't say about the races, and when I talked about Cambria, I didn't tell you where the furry Allure were. I didn't tell you stuff about the Gentry, that they have tails that are sometimes prehensile. I mean, there's just stuff that I never got to. I never talked about. I really wanted to talk about all the regional spirits that are powerful in each of these areas. It just there's no time to do everything, and I don't know how to share this with everyone. I mean, in some ways, this is a sad thing that I probably know more about this world that I made than I know about the world that I live in. But in other ways, having this world that I constantly work on and constantly think about has made me more aware of our world, because I have to understand how rivers work. I have to understand how trade winds work. I have to understand how colonization works, and I have to understand how cultures interact with each other, and I have to understand how language works, and I have to understand how uh, things like gunpowder and electricity work. I kind of have to understand how volcanism works and the roles of moons and the tides, and I have to understand how astronomy works. So in some ways, the fact that I'm constantly trying to understand this imaginary world has made me uh, kind of more clear on stuff that happens in this world. And maybe this is all just a supreme waste of time. Maybe it's a supreme waste of time for you to have watched this video, in which case I'm sorry. Maybe it's a supreme waste of time for me to engage in this kind of speculative fantasy, especially if I never get another, the novel's fully written. Uh, what have I really done this for? Why have I spent all of these years thinking about this? Uh, but I don't know. I think there's something at the core of what it is to be human that makes us creative and create. And, there's probably something messed up about the idea that right now, if you don't create a product that can be sold, that the creative aspects of yourself uh, aren't aren't explored as much. And so I don't feel at all bad about the time that I waste on this. I sort of feel like this is part of why God made me, and I don't really understand it, but it's still true. But anyway, like I said, I really didn't expect it to be this long. So thank you so much for spending time with me and looking at this world with me, if you did. And if you didn't, I honestly don't blame you. I can't imagine sitting and watching a 3 hour picture of somebody's world building. I think I'd get bored, but probably maybe I wouldn't. I don't know. Let me know if you watch the whole thing. Go in peace. Bye.